working with Congress on a package of measures to address gun violence, brushing off renewed calls for expanding background checks.
This really hasn't changed anything. We're doing a package, and we'll see how it comes about. It's coming about right now, and a lot of people are talking about it, and that's irrespective of what happened yesterday in Texas. I will say that for the most part, sadly, if you look at the last 4 or 5, going back even 5 or 6 or 7 years, for the most part, as strong as you make your background checks, they would not have stopped any of it.
With me now is former ATF Special Agent Jim Cavanaugh. Is that true, Jim? Do you think that none of these would have been stopped by a background check?
No, that's just double talk and babble from the gun lobby. Look, the way it works in gun laws, they prevent the next killing, but you need a series of good laws, good safety laws, where you can interrupt the killers. Every law won't interrupt every killer.
Right.
But when you have different laws, there are hurdles that killers have to get over. They have to pass the background check to get the gun. If they can't pass the background check, they go on the street or black market to buy the gun. They might be trying to buy a gun from someone who harms them, a criminal. They might be dealing with an undercover ATF agent. They might get arrested with a stolen gun. There's all these hurdles that come in. They might get arrested on the way to do a killing. They might, which he may have been going to do. The shooter in Odessa, he may have been going to the theater to kill people. We don't know when the troopers pulled him over. So it's a series of laws. Sometimes they'll pick someone off. Sometimes they won't. But when you have that framework of law, then you reduce the killing. So that's just double talk. Just briefly, real briefly, Ali, just a history of this is that Congress has always acted when these things struck America. 1934, the National Firearms Act, when the machine gun registration came in, was because of the gangster weapons. You remember Elliot Ness, the machine gun drive-bys. You know, he was in the Bureau of Prohibition later, which became the ATF. Then in '68, the assassinations of President Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Dr. King. The country was up in arms, forced Congress to act. We got the '68 Gun Control Act. And then when President Reagan was shot, the country was upset. We got the Brady bill years later for background checks. And we got the assault weapons ban in the 90s because the public was upset after Patrick Purdy massacred children on a schoolyard in Stockton, California with a Kalashnikov rifle. The public was upset. The Congress acted. This is unprecedented, really. The public is extremely upset.
Correct.
And the Congress is failing to act. It's historically upside down. Every time the public has been upset and said, we don't want any more of this, the Congress has acted. So we're in a real different historical posture on the way gun laws have been formed.
So all of these, there are a bunch of things that have gone on in the country that might form that sort of patchwork of laws that might prevent someone from doing something. We've started to see a number of states enact red flag laws, which could be helpful because in some of these cases, these people have been known to have histories where they've been abusive to their domestic partners or spouses. Background checks would have helped in some cases. And still a majority of this country thinks we need to do something about assault weapons. That's the one commonality in almost all of the mass shootings that we've seen. They've been committed with these assault-style weapons. Now, the NRA will have you think that that's no different than if you went out with a shotgun or a normal rifle to do these things. But you say that they are different.
Well, they're very different. I mean, this is exactly the same question that our great-grandfathers faced in 1934 when they were in the Congress. Gangster-type weapons, that's what the law says, the National Firearms Act. Gangster-type weapons. The weapons killers and gangsters were using, mostly they were killing other gangsters, like the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, but they were killing police officers and federal agents, like at the Kansas City train station. Machine Gun Kelly, Machine Gun Jack McGurn. You know, we used to have these old search warrants and arrest warrants on those guys in ATF headquarters from back in the 30s when they were doing these shootings. And those were submachine guns coming in after the First World War. And the Congress said, hey, no, these are military guns. They shouldn't be in public hands. So we're going to, make laws that restrict them. Well, those laws that restricted them really controlled those weapons for 50, 60 years. And we rarely ever saw a registered submachine gun used in a crime.
Right.
I think the NRA used to brag that it was only 1 or 2 ever, because it was military collectors and gun aficionados and hobbyists. And if it was a machine gun on the street, you know, we would send agents out right away and arrest the person and take the machine gun if it was illegally possessed. That's what ATF did. And the collectors, you know, we helped them. We respected them. They would register it. They would give the fingerprints and the photographs and pay the transfer tax. So the scheme worked to keep the guns out of the hands of the killers. And now the killers have appropriated the semi-automatic version of the military, you know, submachine gun for our troops. This is just a semi-automatic version, but it has the same killing power. So the country has to decide, you know, they already passed, their law was passed in the 90s that outlawed them. And the most significant thing in that law, Allie, the most significant thing was the reduction of the magazine capacity. After the end of the 10 years, because it was reduced to 10, after the end of 10 years, when we started making the seizures on those, we could see that we were getting more and more seizures with, you know, 10-round magazines. In the early years, we would still get the 30-round magazine.
Interesting.
But then we started to get the 10-round magazine. The guns, you know, the bayonet lugs and how bad and awful they look, didn't do much because the manufacturers just skirted around that by taking all that stuff off. So you really got to name the gun specifically if you want it to be registered, and you got to deal with the magazine capacity.
Jim, I always learn a lot from you. Thank you, sir. Jim Cavanaugh, former ATF and MSNBC terrorism analyst. Also, news.